Greetings, wrestling fans, and welcome to Fannin's Flashbacks, the podcast that nobody asked for, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. This podcast is going to cover tales from IWA Mid-South during my 12 years with the company, and it will be a part of the VNMVS Podcast Network. This podcast is intended for mature audiences only due to the foul language and graphic details about deathmatch wrestling that it will contain. This will be your backstage pass to get a peek behind the curtain at what led to the downfall of the craziest independent wrestling promotion of the late 1990s, early 2000s. And without any further ado, Nick Manawa, hit the music.
Greetings, wrestling fans, and welcome to Fannin's Flashbacks. This is episode 22. And it is definitely the podcast that nobody asked for because we never want to have to do shows like this. But in the wrestling business, it just happens way too frequently where we lose members of our fraternity way too early. And so this is the tribute to Mark Wolf episode that we've been promising everybody, and there's really no great way to do an episode like this. There's no way to truly encapsulate everything that Mark Wolf meant to me, to IWA, to the fans, to the other wrestlers. We've opened this up to allow fans, friends, family, just people that appreciated what Mark Wolf did inside the ring, people that knew him. We tried to open this up and let folks send in their feelings, their emotions, their memories. And, you know, it's still very fresh in a lot of people's minds. Still hurts a little too much for quite a few of the people to be able to come up with something that could truly honor Mark. And there's really no way to do him justice. So we're going to do our best with this episode. We're going to piece together the stuff that we received from our messages asking for people to send their stuff in. You know, very thankful to the ones that took the time and found the ability to tough it out and submit something, and those that told us that they just couldn't bring themselves to do it. We fully understand. Somewhere down the line, if you get to the point that you feel that it's something that you can offer up and be able to get through, we can definitely accept it later and throw it into a future episode, because we don't just have to pay tribute to Mark Wolf once. He's definitely worth a lot more than that. So, like I said, we're going to do the best that we can here to try to put everything together, but just know that this tribute comes from a place of love, and we know that it's not going to be enough to show our appreciation, but it was the best that we could do. So I'm going to let Nick take over with the editing, and he can start putting in some of the clips and some of the photos. And then we'll go from there.
Quick thing about Mark Wolf. sweet human being. Never had an issue with him. Was a really dry, funny guy when I was around him. He was actually supposed to come in for Pawcade a couple years ago. Life interfered with that, as life tends to do, but he was willing to come all the way up here for that show. We all know how much he loved his dog, animals in general. But Mark was one of those guys that you asked him a question, he was going to give you an answer to it, and he was always honest and just a solid dude all around. And it's unfortunate that he's not going to be here to hear all the nice things that people are saying about him. But we love you, Mark, and I'm sorry that you're gone.
Mark Wolf was an amazing human being and someone who I miss dearly. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way because Marky touched so many people. Marky always looked out for his people. He was selfless, oftentimes to his own detriment. Whether it was giving food to those who needed it or donating money that he himself needed, he just gave so freely. He had a zen attitude about it, where it didn't seem to worry him, and he knew he'd be okay. I was a beneficiary of his selflessness during a period where I was unhoused, staying in a motel with my pups and eating whatever I could find to feed myself and them. Mark started sending me money so that my pups and I could eat real food. He was the light during one of the darkest times of my life. I miss talking to him every day. I miss having my balls busted 1 second and being told, "I love you, man," the next second. I miss listening to him talk his career and favorite matches. I especially miss how excited he'd get talking about Mitch Ryder, Hero, Tracy, Todd Moore, and Ian, and all the characters he loved working with or hanging around. I miss listening to his adventures with Talia, the pup that gave him new life after Tito, his last pup, passed. She could be a real pain in his ass, but he was the first one to admit he was a pain in hers too. The bond they shared was beautiful. I'm so grateful she was there for him in those last years. I miss talking about politics, history, current events, and of course wrestling. I miss waking up to random matches he sent me at 4 a.m. he wanted me to watch, or documentaries he'd think I'd like. I miss sending him match and documentary recommendations too. Still today, I sometimes reach for my phone to send Marky something only to remember he is gone. The last time it happened, it was on Sunday. I'd always send him a picture of the crowd my shows drew so he could bust my balls about how I could be bigger and then point out empty spaces. Every time I get a text, I think it might be Marky, but it's not. I miss him a lot. I know I'm not alone. I could talk about Marky for hours, but I don't want to take too much time. I just want to join others in saying I love and miss you, Marky, that I'm so thankful for all you did for me and being a part of my life. Thank you, my friend. Much love, Adam Lash. The absolute best thing that came out of me working for IWA Mid-South was getting to become friends with Mark Wolf. I have so many great memories of Russell House, Indiana, when Mark and Chris Hero opened their home to the Detroit crew, and many, many more. Surrounded by mountains of wall-to-wall VHS tapes, people in that house and our generation helped create the wrestling style you see on your screens today. You tend to lose touch with many people over the years. Me and Mark never lost touch, and I'm very grateful for that. You only get so many true friends in this life, and I'm thankful God put Marky in my life. Mark was a special and kind man who was adored by the ones who got to love him.
Newsflash, everybody listening. Wrestling is full of scumbags. It's full of backstabbers, liars, thieves, sex criminals, you name it. They're all over wrestling. And, but guess what? Mark Wolf was not one of them. I first met Mark Wolf when I was 19, 20 years old, going down to IWA, and right away I could tell he was a solid dude. Always had a shoot job, always had his own place. Most of us at the time either had girlfriends who could basically pay the bills or had parents willing to support them. But Mark was on his own and took care of himself, and was always quick to offer his place to crash. You can go stay at Mark's house whenever you wanted. He'd feed you. give you a comfortable place to sleep. And, yeah, man, I can name 15, 20 guys that crashed at Mark's house countless times. It's just a shame. It's hard to, I'm not going to lie and say that I was best friends with Mark. I hadn't talked to him, I don't know, I think the last time I spoke to him was a little over a year ago. And I knew he wasn't doing so hot, and I always hoped he'd kick out. And, yeah, man, it's just a damn shame. I don't think Mark ever did anyone dirty. I know he was done dirty countless times. Yeah, it's just a shame. Trying to think of anything else there is to say, man. Other than it's a goddamn shame. I don't know what else. There's plenty of guys walking around right now that deserve to be in Mark's spot that aren't. And, yeah, life's not fair, man. That's for damn sure. Oh boy. I guess if I'm gonna leave anyone with any impression of Mark, it's just that in a community of shitty people, Mark was one of the few good ones. And that's 100%.
You know, I've been kind of putting this off because I wasn't really sure what to say, but I'm running out of time. So either way, Mark was a pretty big part of some of my favorite memories from my late teens to early 20s. When I first noticed him coming around, he seemed pretty standoffish, but it was probably just my interpretation of him because I didn't really know him. I was pretty much an introvert at that point. I still am, really. But anyways, and so I didn't really talk to him much for a while. But once I did, I realized that, I really liked him. He was very nice and so forth. And after getting to know him for a while, one thing I won't forget is he had a tape of the Dynamite Kid and Tiger Mask series. And I absolutely fell in love with watching that tape over and over anytime I was around him. And he really loved just being in the wrestling ring. I know he and Isaiah and myself and Harry Palmer would go up there on Thursday nights, I think it was, and just kind of mess around in the ring. And he taught me so much and helped me so much just with little things and, stuff like that. I'll just never forget. I have another clear memory of watching the Indiana versus Duke basketball game in the '02 tournament at the apartment that he shared with Hero, and Hero was out of town at a show or something, and it was me and Richard X and Mark, and Duke was beating the hell out of Indiana. They were down by like 17 at halftime, and even though Mark wasn't really a Duke fan, he was just giving me all kinds of crap because he knew he could. But Indiana came back and ended up winning that game, and I remember just, even though he wasn't a Duke fan, just laying into him just because he gave it to me so bad. And then, of course, I'll never forget being lucky enough to referee the bunch of the matches that he had with Mitch Ryder. And those were easily some of the most fun matches I ever got to ref. And it's just, I hate to admit it, but I didn't really talk to Mark a whole lot over the last few years once he moved away and so forth. But I did reach out to him after his episode on the podcast, and we chatted briefly through Facebook Messenger. And for that, I'm really happy. I'm really going to miss him. He was a huge part in an important time in my life. And those memories are, something I'm never going to forget. I'm glad that I got to know him the way that I did. I wish we'd have been closer, but I'm glad we at least got to reconnect before he passed.
Hi, everyone. This is Rugby Thug Trent Baker, and I just wanted to share my memories of Mark Wolf. I wrestled in IWA Mid-South for about a year and a half, and Mark was there the whole time that I was there. And we only had one match. And I remember we were going over the match and I had ideas and Mark had ideas. And his ideas were better than the ideas I had, so we went with that. And I remember it being a positive experience working with him. And he was always nice to me in the locker room. We always had good interactions. There was one night that myself, Chris Hero, and Shank Dorsey were coming home from a Charlestown Blue Barn show, and the alternator on my old Buick Skylark went out as we were on the highway in Louisville, and we were stranded on the side of the road. And Hero thankfully had a cell phone, and he was able to call Mark, who I think was sleeping at the time. And he answered the phone, and he came and he picked us up, and we stayed at his house till the next day when one of the members of Mullet Security was able to go to AutoZone and get another alternator and fix my car for me. But yeah, Mark really helped us out that night. And I know there's probably tons of stories of Mark doing similar things, helping people whenever he could. And the last time that I saw Mark in person was 2014 at the NWA Fan Fest in Charlotte. And me and a buddy made the trip down there. And I believe Mark was living in Charlotte at the time. And I think he was working Bobby Fulton's table. And he had seen on Facebook that I was there, and he messaged me and he's like, hey, let's come say hi. And so, I found him and we talked for a little while. And so it was a real pleasant surprise to be able to see Mark again after all those years. And, we stayed Facebook friends and stuff. And I wish I knew him better. I know I wasn't in IW Mid-South as long as a lot of the guys were. But Mark was loved by a lot of people, and he'll be missed by a lot of people. And I hope that he's resting in peace. And we love you, Mark. And I just cherish the time that I got to spend with you, even though it wasn't as long as a lot of people. But yeah, rest in peace, Marky. We love you.
Hey, welcome back, wrestling fans. And I am about to read the submission that Bull Payne sent in. So this is what Bull Payne submitted. I really sat down and had to think about this, but I really don't have any good stories about Mark since we really never hung out. All I can say is what a truly great guy he was and how much he meant to me as a friend and brother. The only thing I can remember was the story he always brought up when we chatted on Facebook. He reminded me of the time when the bad motherfuckers had hit the ring on him and we were stomping his guts out along with me hitting him with Brother Payne. Then he looked up at me and begged me to get Todd and Mitch to stop kicking him because they were killing him. That he would rather take my bat shots than another kick from them crowbars. Another story that pops into my head was Mark had really injured his head pretty bad, and he was scheduled to work with me for Ian. I told him absolutely not, you're too hurt. But Ian insisted we work a match, and Mark was pretty adamant about it because he needed the money. Also because he trusted me that I would take care of him out there. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but told him, you're not doing anything out there, okay? You just listen to me and follow my lead. So I jumped him from behind and I got him down on the mat. I told him to stay down, and I just dropped elbows and kicks on him while I worked the crowd and got heat. In fact, I did the old slip on a banana peel and let him almost pin me. Then I attacked him with Brother Payne till I got disqualified and he got his hand raised. He was so happy because I was supposed to go over, but I put him over instead because he was so brave to go out there with such a bad head injury. The crowd popped, but Ian was pissed. But I didn't care. Mark was the best, and the fact that he trusted me that much meant a lot to me. I truly miss his messages just out of the blue where he would tell me he loved me and missed me. along with usually asking me a question about training, etc. He was truly a great guy that I can honestly say he never said a bad word about anyone, and I don't think I ever heard a bad word about him either. We were all blessed, in my opinion, to cross paths with this kind soul of a man. I know I was. He always laughed and was in good spirits. Truly a genuine good guy. Mark is a love you brother. Rest well, my dear friend. God bless. Again, that was Bull Payne talking about a couple of his memories with Mark after I received the message and talked a little with Bull. I had to remind him that we did work together at Home Depot. It was Mark Wolf, Bull Payne, and myself working the overnight shift at the Home Depot in Clarksville, Indiana, right by the warehouse building, not too far away. Home Depot Mike was the store manager, famous front row fan at the shows. And he knew we all needed money that we weren't getting from the shows. So he hired us. We could work overnight during the week and then have the weekend off to where we could wrestle in the warehouse and keep IWA going. So he paid us quite well for what we were doing. And we had a lot of great times, the three of us. We tried to keep kayfabe alive. And, it was during the time where we were doing the build up for me versus Bull at King of the Death Matches 2003. And Mark was helping train me, even though I guess that wasn't quite kayfabe since he was the baby face and Bull was the baby face and I was the heel. But Mark would act like he was trying to give me tips on how to train and get in shape for the big match. And me and Bull would yell at each other and argue. And nobody really thought that I was actually going to get into the ring, but we convinced them that the match was going to happen. So a bunch of them came out to the King of the Deathmatch show. And when the match did not happen, they were not happy with me. They didn't speak to me for a couple of weeks after that. And me and Bull shared a good laugh about those memories of, being able to work with Mark outside of the IWA shows and just to get to have a little bit of the insight into the person that was Mark Wolf. And like Bull said in his messages, Mark was the best. And yeah, no, I've never heard anybody say a bad word about Mark because there's nothing bad that you could say about him other than he loved IWA and wrestling a little bit too much.
It's been a couple months since we lost Mark Wolf, and it's definitely hit the Midwest independent scene, the IWA Mid-South scene a lot harder, obviously, due to our personal relationships with Mark. Mark was just the best of all of us. He was blunt. He was straightforward, but he cared. He cared whether it was as a fellow wrestler. He would give you tips. He would give you tricks. Hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Hey, I see this working. Try it this way. Whether it be referees, whether it be managers, it didn't matter. Mark could find a way to improve things and honestly really make it a better product as a whole, a better experience as a whole. I first met Mark, easy for me to say, when he moved to Louisville, Kentucky to live with Ian and Patty and all the kids. And I want to say that was late 98, 99. We really didn't really, he was around, but we didn't really gel. We didn't really connect. We didn't really have much interaction, even though he lived in the house and I was at the house all the time. He was working a regular job. Uh, that Charlestown era, the 2001, 2000 era, when he started as a referee and then turned heel with Harry Palmer, is one of his best friends, Harry Palmer. And, they started their little run there of the resistance from getting the inspiration from the South Park movie. Harry Palmer, Mark Wolf, Todd Morton, and Chris Hero. Harry and Mark Wolf obviously brought the comedy. I remember fans used to throw Twix bars at Harry Palmer because he said he was a cruiserweight and he was so skinny and he was in his, career best shape. Uh, obviously that was good to get Mark. Mark did train before he came to IWA Mid-South. He talked about that on the Fannin's Flashbacks podcast that he did. But it was very good to get him under the wing of Harry Palmer, to get him under the learning tree of Todd Morton and even Chris Hero at that stage of Hero's career. Those 3 and 4 guys brought the best out of each other. And then when, of course, Mark turned face because you couldn't deny the connection and the emotional investment that people had in the story of him and Todd, of Todd, smacking him in the face and being mean to him. And, he finally turned babyface and, he lived that babyface life for the rest of his run, really, in IWA Mid-South. Um, that of course brought on Todd Morton and the BMFs. And Marky told me multiple times that, kicks from Todd and Mitch took years off of his life just because they were kicking him so hard. You heard the Bull Payne story already where he was begging Bull to put him down with the bat because it was easier to take the bat shots than it was the kicks from Mitch and Todd. Marky wasn't afraid to get bloody. He wasn't afraid to do death matches if it called for it. Obviously, that was earlier on in his career, being in the King of the Deaths and stuff of that nature. But this feud with Mitch Ryder, this feud with the BMFs and Todd, he's getting busted open by chains, by bats, by chairs, by anything they could find to put a hurting on Mark Wolf. And it didn't matter because he would rise up and he would make that comeback and the fans would get behind him. And he'd finish that match and go home and then come back the next week and do the same damn thing. And then of course we get to Clarksville. And Clarksville, obviously we had some interactions in Charlestown and stuff, but Clarksville is really, becoming friendly with Mark. And, they invited me. Him and Hero famously had, as mentioned a few times here on this podcast already, him and Hero famously had Russell House, Indiana win, where, him and Mark Wolf and Helena Heavenly live there. And then every weekend after the shows that people would drive from Michigan, from Illinois, from Nebraska, from Iowa, from wherever they live, from the East Coast. If you needed a place to stay, Chris Hero and Mark Wolf opened up their doors. You might only get a spot on the couch. You might only get a spot on the floor. Might end up sleeping in the kitchen if there's 20 people there in the house, but you had a safe place to lay your head. Not without some ribs, not without some fun from the host, I guess you will. It was after a Clarksville show that I went home with Mark and Hero and hung out for a weekend. We watched WrestleMania 20 together. That was a blast. Uh, Marky would always check in on me and check up on me. And, we had a fun little thing every Thanksgiving. He was a big fan of Patty's Thanksgiving cooking, and 5-cup salad and sweet potato stuff and stuff like that. And I would always send him a picture of my plate, or my picture of sweet potato stuff, and be like, "Hey man, come on, come get your plate." Sadly, I'll never be able to send those text messages ever again, because he ain't gonna be answering. The last time I saw Mark Wolf was at I think it was the 20th. No, it was the 18th anniversary show. It was in 2016, so it was about 10 years ago. He returned to IWA action, teaming up with the Rejects against Todd Morton's Hangman. Another, chapter in that saga of Mark Wolf against Todd Morton against the BMFs. Um, he looked great. He was, in that ring, ready to dish out some ass whoopings, and that's exactly what he did. Able to tag up with John Wayne Murdoch and Reed Bentley, and take on Todd Morton's Hangman. That was a blast. It was, every couple weeks, every few days, I'd get a message from Marky. "Hey, how's it going? Hey, check this out." Send some kids to me to get critiqued. And at the time he sent me that message, I didn't have many kids under my wing that I didn't want to waste his time with somebody that didn't care. He I can't tell you how many times I heard "Not today, Mark" from an IWA show from Ian Rotten, just saying, whatever whatever kind of craziness, whatever kind of BS, whatever kind of pun or story he can make up to, you know, high stress, high strung Ian Rotten would always be the brunt of the butt of the joke. Whatever, would get the brunt of all that silliness. He we talked about wrestling, we talked about movies, we talked about TV. He was just Marky was just the best of us all. And it pains me that he is no longer around, and I'm just so thankful and happy that we were able to get that podcast done, because Marky wasn't doing too good, and we everybody tried to give their support and their love, but it just felt like he was in Narnia. He was so far away from us, even though he was only in North Carolina. And like I mentioned before, Mark was blunt. He was straightforward. It was no BS. He'd give it to you straight. And I think that's how Mark showed that he cared. If he blew you off or didn't give you advice, he had nothing for you. But, if he knew that you cared, if he knew that you gave a damn, if you cared even half as much as he did, he would do everything in his power to help you out, do everything in his power to make you better. And he did it for everyone. He did it for everyone. I know he had, living in North Carolina there, he was chilling, he was training a little bit with Willie Clay and helping train some, guys in North Carolina. He got to meet Jackie Fargo, which was a big deal to him. And, he told me stories of locking up with Jackie Fargo on the porch. And, we had talked about, oh, maybe you can, come in for a show and, bring Jackie with you and be managed by Jackie, and, crazy stuff like that. And unfortunately, it never happened. But it was such a big deal to be, around Jackie Fargo, one of the greatest of all time. He was doing some training with Sam Houston at that same school, and would send me clips and videos and pictures of him and Sam hanging out, and Sam training the next generation. Marky really felt the most alive when he was on that mat, whether it be pro wrestling, collegiate style wrestling, doing any kind of MMA or any kind of exercising like that, doing the card workout. Obviously he had much and major love for his animals, Tito and Talia. Um, was always going on walks with them or taking them to the park or going on rides, and that was his soulmate. Both of those pups were. And it's just sad that he's not going to be around. It's just sad that life gave him such a hard few years there at the end. And that was, he didn't want to leave North Carolina. He didn't want to leave that house that he was in because, it had so much, family history. But I wish we would have been able to get him up here to Kentucky and up here, somewhere centrally located where he could be surrounded by love and friends and family. And unfortunately, that never came to be either. Marky always ended everything with much love. And that's how I'm going to end this one. Because much love is all that I have for Mark Wolf. He was a great friend. He's a fantastic pro wrestler. If you've listening to this, if you're watching this and you haven't seeked out some of that stuff with Mitch and Todd and Bull and Hero and all that stuff, you can find it online. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it, on the streaming services that IWA Mid-South is on, and you can watch it like a TV show. You can watch it, I mean, like a episodic TV show, because every single week he's getting pounded on, he's getting beat on, he's making that comeback, he's winning matches and then getting beat on after winning, and then he was able to win the IWA title from Chris Hero, able to win the tag team titles, even though we did not have actual physical titles with Harry Palmer. I implore you to go back and watch that footage, because there is not a better baby face than Mark Wolf, especially in that 02-03 era of IWA. They even brought it back, years later in 2006. Him and Mitch, reignited that feud in Illinois for anniversary shows up there. But Marky, I love you. I will miss you forever. If you haven't, go back, watch his footage, go back, watch the podcast, listen to the podcast that he did with Jim. There's so many great stories to hear him laugh and to hear him, tell these stories. And, it's a shame that all these inside jokes and all these stories that only we know are just going to fade away because nobody knows the stories. And that's truly sad. But, I had so much fun being around Mark and getting to be his friend and picking his brain for ideas and getting his thoughts on psychology and uh just stuff that nobody does anymore, what he thought. And it's a damn shame that it's always the good ones that go. I love you, Marky. I'll forever love you. And I hope you're I hope you're on a wrestling show somewhere up there. You know, you and Mitch Ryder one more time. I think that's fitting. Hopefully, paydays are a little bit better up there, buddy. I love you, Marky.
I was never directly involved in IWA, so I never shared a ring with Mark Wolf or shared a dressing room with him. But he was on the short list of guys that became good friends. And when Mark first started wrestling for IWA, the gimmick was that he got hit on the head really hard and it caused him to act really goofy for several months. And he had tag matches and six-man tag matches with Harry Palmer and Todd Morton. But Mark would get confused and he thought he was tagging with his boyhood idol, Ricky Morton, instead of Todd. And so he would say, "Let's go, Ricky." And Todd Morton would be like, who's Ricky? And then when his partners were in the ring, Mark would get on the floor and just kind of wander around like a lost puppy. And one time he wandered and was standing in front of me, and I said, "Mark, get back up there. Ricky needs you." And Mark looked at me and said, "Ricky? Ricky needs me?" And I said, "Yeah, get back up there." And Mark was, "Okay." So he got back on the apron and got back in the corner and reached out his hand and said, "Ricky, I'm here for you, buddy." Then another one of their matches, Roland Hard was on the other team, and Mark got down and was wandering around and ended up at the concession stand and ordered a plate of nachos and brought them back to the ring and was eating nachos, even though he's supposed to be a participant in this match. And when the match was over, Roland came over and took the nachos and dumped them on top of Mark's head. And so Mark had this big glob of nacho cheese hanging off the side of his head, which of course he thought was hilarious. Um, he wanted to leave the cheese on his head for the entire week so that when they came back the next week, the cheese would be dried and crusty on the side of his head. But he had a real life job and he knew he couldn't get away with having dried up nacho cheese on his head. So he didn't go with that. He washed it off. And of course, once Mark became more of a normal wrestler, which I have to admit, it took me longer than it should have to realize that the goofy Mark Wolf gimmick wasn't really a gimmick. That was just the way Mark was. But once Mark started, once he turned babyface, that was a perfect role for him because Mark was the perfect Southern wrestling babyface. And Mitch Ryder was cut from that same Southern wrestling cloth, and so they were perfect opponents for each other, and that's why they had classic matches. Of course, my favorite memories of Mark are the ones that are more personal. During the Charlestown days, Mark went home to North Carolina to visit his family for a few weeks. And on his first show back, he got a huge ovation for his ring entrance. And as he's making his way around the ring, greeting everybody, he stopped and gave me a big bear hug, and then went on to the rest of the fans. And it meant the world to me that he thought enough of our relationship that he would stop just for a couple of extra seconds and give me a hug like that. That meant the world to me. Then, as Jim has talked about on the podcast, Mark was a member of the Fannin family during the War Games match, which was up in Valparaiso, Indiana. After the show, I was getting ready to leave, and Mark Wolf said, "Rich Wayne, where are you headed?" And I was like, "I'm driving all the way back home to Louisville." And he's like, "Okay, I'm riding with you," and jumped in my car. And I was like, "Okay, sure, let's go." And it was great. I love spending that time with Mark, just telling stories and laughing, for that 3 or 4 hours on the way home. And of course, I had to drive him to wherever he had left his car the day or two before, but I didn't mind that at all. I loved spending time with Mark. The last time I saw Mark was on October 6th, 2016, at the IWA Mid-South 20th anniversary show. That show featured a lot of the old school IWA guys, including Mark and Chris Hero, Bull Payne, Too Tough Tony, Harry Palmer, Tracy Smothers, Mitch Ryder, and Nate Webb, along with Isaiah and Quifa, the Flying Hawaiian. When I saw Mark that night, I gave him a big, long hug because it had been a long time since I've seen him. And it's great in life when your last memory of someone is a great memory. Jim Fannin, whether you do this podcast for another 6 episodes or 6 months or 6 years, Mark's episode will always be the best episode, because it was great that we got to hear Mark's thoughts and stories and laughter, before he passed. Mark Wolf, I love you and I miss you. Thank you.
So I met Mark at Olytic. I can't remember what year it was. I want to say maybe 2004, 5, whenever you guys at Mid-South were running shows there. It was like a November, I think. Yeah, we hit it off, and then he added me on Instant Messenger, and we just kind of became fast friends and constantly had conversation. And, it was very cool just chatting with him and talking to him about life, and we shared a lot of cool moments, just, things we both experienced, and it was a blast. Eventually, that whole Russell House and everything kind of dissolved, and everyone went their ways, and Marky went back down to the Carolinas. And, we still kept up on Instant Messenger, and eventually one day, he was like, "Hey, I'm going to come up to AAW in Berwyn. Are you there?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, come on through." So he came to the show, whatever. I think he was on like one of the dark matches and just hung out and shot the shit with everybody. And then we all went to the after party at the sponsor, which was Michael Anthony's at the time. So we were like, "Yeah, we'll all meet up there." So from Berwood Eagles to Michael Anthony's, it was about, I don't know, maybe 3 miles. But to get there, you had to cross these train tracks, and they were just completely horrible. Like, you'd be stuck there for 20 to 30 minutes if they didn't do like a car change or anything. Otherwise, it could even be, exponentially longer. So that time we both, hit Snake Eyes. Marky was up front by the train tracks, and, he's stuck there. I'm maybe a car or two behind him, and he's in his Bronco with Brian Gorey, and they're just shooting the shit or whatever, waiting for the train to pass. And I'm just like, I'm gonna fuck with Marky, because it's what I do sometimes. So I slowly sneak out of my car, sneak up to his Bronco. He's got his arm hanging off the side of the window. I think this was sometime maybe spring or summer, otherwise he wouldn't have his damn window open. But yeah, I go up and I just slowly graze my hand across the arm hair of his arm, and he just freaks out. His eyes just go completely white. He like bounces up, and he's just like, "What the fuck is it?" Ah! And I just like go scattering away back to my car, giggling, get in my car. Out of nowhere, Marky pops out of the car with a giant buck knife. He's like, "You motherfucker, you scared the shit out of me." Brian Gorey pops out of the other side of the passenger side, just dying laughing with tears in his eyes. Couldn't breathe. He's just like, "Oh my God." Eventually the train passes. We get to the after party. And yeah, Marky's like, "What the fuck was that?" I was like, "I don't know. I was bored and I haven't fucked with you today." So I was like, why not? He's like, "You motherfucker." He's like, "I was scared as shit thinking it was some asshole like trying to rob me." I'm like, "Oh no, just me." So yeah, that was my weird Mark Wolf story. But yeah, I just wanted to share that since it was just like a weird thing that, a moment I had with him, I guess. And I'm just grateful that you guys are, really focusing and giving some energy to Marky today with this podcast, and hope for nothing for the best for his family and his friends that are all affected by, the loss of Mark. And yeah, thanks for letting me share my story.
Hey, my name's Ben, and I'm going to try to do this quickly without getting emotional, or as quickly as I can while trying to sum up my friendship with Mark Wolf. And I'm not going to talk about wrestling because there are far more people more appropriate than me to touch on his career and what he gave and what he meant to them in that capacity. I met Mark mostly after wrestling was over, not quite, about 14 years ago. And we bonded over the Orioles. I knew who Mark was, but we bonded over the Orioles on Twitter, eventually slid in each other's DMs, exchanged phone numbers. It was a strange way to meet someone, and I've only ever done that with one or two other people. And over the course of 14 years, we texted nearly every single day. Excuse me, with phone calls here and there, and one trip home to Baltimore for Mark where we went to a couple Orioles games together. And he completely horrified the girl I was dating at the time with stories of Mitch Ryder and the Necro Butcher, just casually walking to Camden Yards. And she mentioned it afterwards, and I was kind of like, it's true. I want to talk about Mark Wolf, the friend. And I'm going to keep it brief, or I'm going to try to, because I'm still processing the loss of Mark. I haven't really come to grips with the fact that he's gone, that I'm not going to hear from him again. He's not going to give me shit again. There's so many things that I miss about Mark on a daily basis. His absence is deafening in my life. Mark was always there. When my parents were sick or had an emergency, he would check in, he would call, he would text, and make sure I was okay, make sure they were okay, offer any emotional support he could. Mark is still the only friend that I've ever had that has regularly expressed love and appreciation for me and our friendship. Whether it was just a text message saying much love, or telling me that he appreciated everything that I've done for him. Anything. Always love. Always appreciation. There are not a lot of Mark Wolfs in the world. I would venture a guess there was just one. And I am eternally grateful. My life was enriched of the gift that he gave me in his friendship. Mark cared so much more about the people around him, family, friends, wrestling, that he ever did himself. The definition of selfless. I have never met someone more selfless in my entire life that wanted to talk about himself, but not at the expense of making sure that the people around him were okay, and if they weren't, that they had a space to go. He was special. His friendship was special. It's not something that you can replace, that you can replicate. And as I'm navigating and trying to process what life looks like without that type of friend, I have been able to reevaluate just how special he and his friendship were. So I hope everyone that knew Mark, that loved Mark, that was friends with Mark, takes some time to think about the things that he did for them, that he expressed to them, and be grateful for that type of person and that type of friend to come along in all of our lives, and not get hung up on the loss as much as what he gave. Mark represented to me true friendship, not without judgment, but without ever casting any type of judgment on me that made me feel less of a person. Any judgment he ever casted was just at my expense for a joke. He was there through some of the worst times of my life when I was really screwing up. And he called me out on it. He made sure that I knew I was a fuck up. But he also made sure that I knew that he loved me. So, I appreciate Jim Fannin and Nick Manawa allowing whoever to send messages and remember Mark. And I hope that through the loss and through the trying to understand and trying to process that a lot of us are going through, that we put back into our friendship and our loved ones what was put into us by Mark. So, think that's it. Mark, I love you. I appreciate you. I miss you. And I will never forget you.
So, one of the greatest things about Mark Wolf was, one, he was very blunt and direct. So being somebody that trained under him, he didn't bullshit you. And two, one of the first places I actually was able to sit down and absorb a lot of information, especially about psychology of wrestling, was from Mark Wolf. He had a great mind for the business. And he was a little bit of a prankster. One of the memories I will tell you about is, so at the time I was training 5 days a week with 5 different trainers every single day that did not agree with each other on their training style. And if you did what trainer A said to do on trainer B, C, D, E, or F's day, you paid the penalty, whether that would be calisthenics, whether that would be bump drills, whether that would be any numerous varieties of punishment. But also with that is every trainer had their own unique approach to training. For example, Chris Hero, who lived in what we called the Wrestle House of Indiana with Mark Wolf, Helena Heavenly, and Punk would stay there when Punk was in town. A lot of the wrestlers did, actually. But Hero was notorious for having videotapes, floor to ceiling. Every wall was covered with videotapes. And I mean VHS videotapes. This is well before DVD, digital media, things like that. So it was part of my training with Hero that he would give you numerous amounts of tape to review, and you'd have to go through on the psychology of the matches, from start to finish, from curtain to curtain, and it never failed. Now at this time I also had 2 jobs that I worked, so needless to say, sleep was not something that came accustomed to me, and I suffered from insomnia through my childhood traumas anyway. So I would drop off these tapes with papers and papers of written essays on these matches, and pick up more tapes. So one day I went over another story I have about Mark Wolf. We were training one night, and this is before I got to train or join the rest of the class, because when I started, I was told that ain't no bitch ever graduated from IWA Mid-South and ain't no bitch about to graduate. So they trained me separately from the other class members, which included J.C. Bailey, Simon Says, and the Naptown Dragons, which is like Drake Younger in that group. Kickboxers kids. And we were training one night, and Mark Wolf had these notoriously thick legs. I mean, he had the most muscular legs. He would do these massive amounts of Hindu squats before shows, after shows, during training. He'd make them do it with us. Like, this boy had fucking leg muscles for days. So we're in training, and of course, Hero's busy twisting me up like a pretzel and doing Johnny Saint shit, and Mark's, doing running drills with me, tackle, step over, leapfrog, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, you know what? We're going to teach you how to take a monkey flip. I said, okay. So I get in the corner, I take a monkey flip, land on my back, everything's great. Mark had the great idea to give me a monkey flip with me landing on my feet. Now, never been graceful. It's never been my thing. Chalk it up to probably concussions well before training ever started, but you deal with it. And so I get in the corner, and he goes to give me his monkey flip, and he slingshots me as hard as he can with his fucking massive thigh muscles. And just as I come down on my right leg, and I'll show you here in a second, on my right leg, it just completely bends at a 90-degree angle. Give me 1 second. As you can see there. Don't mind my floor, my kids tracked and stuff. And that's pain on my foot. Anyways, you see, my ankle's been like that ever since I was 18 years old because it said monkey flip. I'm going to land 90-degree angle. I had wrestling shooter shoes, what we call shooter shoes on, and immediately started feeling it swell up. Now, Mark and Hero showed concern. They were like, hey, are you good? Are you okay? You need a break? Of course, fucking asshole Ian was in the background, high as a kite. Do it again. And they both look at Ian. And then they look at me. And they look at Ian. And they look at me. And that was the moment I knew that either I got up and fucking did it again and proved that I was in this for the long haul, or I bitch out like I had seen so many other trainees do in the past. So I stand up with the shoes still on. I stand up, hobble in the corner, and brace myself. Now, when Mark monkey flipped me before, he did it from the middle of the ring and just walked up and did it. And still slingshotted me like fucking we were going to war and I was a fucking rock, okay? And so this time he goes all the way in the opposite corner, diagonal of me, takes off running as hard as he can. And of course, I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Because I didn't know. I'm thinking, well, if this brother just did this halfway in the ring, walking up to me, and this is what happens, how the fuck am I going to do this if he's doing it full fucking speed and this, that, the other? So I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they all stop. And I hear groaning in the background, of course, because, you know, they all think I'm bitching out. And I'm like, well, no. I just didn't know you were running at me. Just let me prepare. So I braced myself up against my ass, up against the second turnbuckle, because the ropes were notoriously high for IWA. And I have my arms up like this. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready. And I'm putting all my weight on my right leg, which is now my bad leg of the two legs. And Mark's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right. So he gets into the corner, takes off, jetting at me, and I'm sweating bullets. I'm thinking I'm going to fucking break this ankle. There's no way I'm going to land this, but I can't bitch out. Mama didn't raise no bitch. You're fucking doing this shit. Takes off running, jumps, lands his feet on the second rope besides my hips, pats me on the head, and jumps down. Now I'm completely dumbfounded at this point, because I was like, well, I was told to do it again, and still standing here. And I'm like, what just happened? And Hero, being the smart ass that Hero is, goes, duh, and he goes and does the same thing Mark just did. He takes off running, jumps on the second rope, pats me on the head like a good dog, jumps down, right? They're like, we just wanted to see if you would do it. And Mark's like, you know, proud of you, kid, you know. So I get out, and I'm taking off the boot and shit. And he was like, you going to the hospital for that? And I was like, no, probably not. And he was like, welcome to the business, kid. And that's when I knew, just by Mark's reaction, just by everything that I had learned up to that point, things of that nature, that in order to earn respect in this business, in order to earn respect from people like Mark, who had devoted most of his life to wrestling, who fucking loved wrestling, I had to be in it all the way. I couldn't just half-ass it. I couldn't do that. And he's the one that told me, you know, if you're going to do this business, if you're going to be what you want to be in this business, if you're going to be one of the boys, you know, they only have to give 100%. You're going to have to give 120. And from that day on, I kept that with me throughout my training, throughout the many years of wrestling. You know, even when Mark no longer was wrestling with IWA, that always resonated with me, because despite his gruff mentality and sometimes his off-putting nature, he truly did love wrestling. He loved everything about it. And, you know, when you have that type of love for something like this, there's really nothing else you could say about the man other than his conviction, and his heart was just so fucking big. And I have always proudly declared him as one of my trainers. Him and Tracy have always been two of the ones I've always said, yeah, they're the reason I am the way I am. So, love me or hate me, blame Mark Wolf. I love you, buddy. And we will always fucking miss you.
I met Mark on LiveJournal. Recently, I went back and read some of his posts. At the end of an entry in 2005, he said, "Get well soon, Pop." And a few days later, he wrote, "R.I.P. Pop." He was talking about my great-grandfather. Going to his funeral was the hardest thing I'd done at that point in my life. Mark checked in with me the entire time. Over the years, we celebrated each other's accomplishments and were genuinely proud of each other. When he was working on his wrestling promotion, he sent me a picture of the title and told me he wanted me to be the first person to see it. After he passed away, I asked out loud if he could find a way to tell me he's okay. When I went to work that night, I walked past a group of people and fell on my ass. Be careful what you ask for. Mark always said to me, you tell people you love them, you never know when you won't be able to anymore. I told him every time we talked, and it still doesn't feel like it was enough. Leslie.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I just wanted to stop in and say hello. My name's Tarek. I used to wrestle for IWA Mid-South Wrestling in Louisville, Kentucky, amongst other places. And I came here tonight to talk about Mark Wolf. We lost Mark recently. He was a staple in IWA Mid-South. He was a hometown favorite guy. He was very, very loved, not only by the fans and, you know, all the boys as well. Loved Mark. If you met Mark, you loved him. And I just wanted to come in and talk about him. And, you know, it was really weird because I kept trying to remember back and think back. And anybody that knows me knows I have a notorious problem of remembering. And right before I came to do this, it just like all flooded to me and I started remembering everything. And you know, Mark was awesome. The main thing I would say about Mark is he was nice. And I like nice people. And Mark was a very, very nice person. He was a good person. Like I said, if you met Mark one time, you would become best friends with him and you wouldn't forget him. Like he was a very personable guy. As far as wrestling in the ring, I couldn't for the life of me remember having matches with Mark, but it just all came back to me. And working with Mark was a really fun time. It was a good time. He wasn't like a lot of guys. Like I would work with some guys and they'd be like, oh, whatever you want to do, Tarek, just whatever you want to do. And I didn't really care for that a whole lot because I like a challenge. You know, you work with somebody like Chris Hero, they're, you know, you're going to be doing everything you can to keep up with them and hope you can, which is a challenge. And Mark always brought something to the table. Like if he knew we were wrestling, he would think about it and plan it out. And we would go to have our match and he would come with his ideas and everything and we would mesh them together. And that makes for a beautiful match. You know, you can tell a really good story like that. And I really enjoyed working with Mark. In that aspect. Mark was very good in the ring, solid, you know, and could work light as a feather or stiff as a board, depending on the situation he was in. You know, there were some guys in IWA Mid-South, obviously, with as long as I was there and how many came in and out of the doors that, you know, I was hesitant to working with. Dangerous. Mark was never dangerous. Mark worked very and very good. And the thing about Mark that blew my mind is such a nice guy, and we could go out there and, you know, do headlocks and hip tosses and suplexes and you know, this and that. Mark could work with anyone. He could have worked with Ricky Morton, and then he could turn around and do just the most insane hardcore match you've ever seen with like Ian Rotten, Bull Payne, guys like that. Mark was double tough. I remember him just being so tough watching his matches, just thinking, oh my God, man, this is like insane. Like, how can he take all this punishment? How can he do this? And then, you know, like I said, Mark was over, man. Like everybody loved him. Like the fans really, really loved Mark. I'll never forget the pops that he got when he came out because like the people respected Mark. Like he took some serious ass whippings in front of these people and dished out some serious ass whippings. So these people held a lot of respect for Mark. Like they believed in Mark, man. And it was really cool to see, you know, he really was like a hometown hero, you know, and I loved working with Mark. You know, I'll always miss him. I always miss all the boys, you know, that, you know, those were some crazy times in my life. And, you know, we did a lot. And Mark was a big part of those, man. And if anybody gets a chance, go back and check out Mark's old matches. Like I said, he could work a scientific style or he could go out there and, I mean, just get nasty with chairs, fighting, brawling, all of it and all of it. You know, his passing was very, very tragic, you know, and unexpected as a surprise. And it really hurt a lot of people, like the output that online that just came in waves for Mark for days long. And, you know, Adam Pierce and just so many different names that just, you know, knew Mark, and Mark touched their lives, man. He really did. He touched my life. He did. I'll never forget Mark Wolf. And it was really cool remembering all these matches that I had with him, like right before I went to do this, man. You know, and it's cool to have the opportunity to talk about Mark, you know, because like those years were so crucial in my life. Like I literally went from a boy to a man in my years in IWA Mid-South, and Mark was a big part of that. You know, I watched him go from a boy into a man. I watched a lot of those guys go from a boy into a man. You know, Cash Flow learned very quickly. Mark learned very quickly. But yeah, man, rest in peace, Mark. We love you. You're loved by a whole bunch of people, dude. Like a whole lot of people love you, man. And they're gonna remember you forever, and they're not gonna forget you, dude. I know I won't, and I know a lot of other people won't. And it was a privilege to be a small, tiny part of Mark's life. You know, the times when, you know, like I said, you know, we would wrestle sometimes twice, 3 times a week. So, you know, I saw Mark on a regular basis. We didn't take showers late at night together. We didn't kiss. But, you know, I knew Mark pretty well from, you know, just being around him all the time, and miss that dude, man. He really touched me, and I'm really happy and privileged that I'm able to be a tiny part of his life, man. And, you know, Jim, thank you. Nick, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Mark, and you know, to all his family, to all his friends, God bless you. I'm sorry, deepest condolences, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. You know, but just know that Mark is loved by many, many people, and we're not going to forget him. We love you, Mark.
Wise, sad story, because around this time is when, you know, Mark Wolf came to town and started getting involved in shows, and I had Mark on.
Oh yeah, I've listened to every episode you put out. I love them all.
And you know, I had told Mark that, you know, for my birthday in November, I went down to Kentucky and saw everybody, had some supper with you, and me, you, and Turner. We're sitting there, you know, planning out this episode, knowing that, you know, you wanted 13 because that's your number, and, you know, trying to rack our memories to come up with things to talk about. And you were like, well, I know you got Mark coming up. You got to bring up Tell City. And I'm like, and we got to bring up the Two Thumbs story. So Mark told those stories on his podcast, and there's some of my favorite stories. And with his untimely passing just before, what are your takes on the Tell City story and on the Two Thumbs story? Just to have your version of it.
I had that podcast playing in the background while we were not exactly sure what was going on. Everybody in the house was in the kitchen making dinner that night, I think we was making dinner that night when I listened to it, because I started listening to it that morning, and something came up. I had to stop, and I finished it later on. And Mark started telling stories that involved me, and everybody were like, "Is he talking about you? Are you the guy he's talking about?" I go, "Yeah, that's me. That's me." And so, you know, my wife, both my kids, my mother, everybody sitting in there, and they're like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And I say, I can't help myself. Sometimes I do stupid shit for some reason. I don't know why I do it. I just do it. It's not something I can control. No, the stories made me laugh. Thinking back on him, I can't remember. It's countless times that I spent sitting over at his apartment, him and Chris Hero, and just watching wrestling, talking about wrestling, going to wrestling shows. all kind of stuff. And they used to always joke about my oldest son. They were like, when he gets old enough, we're just going to take him and we're going to raise him here. We're going to make him live in the little laundry closet in the hallway. And we're just going to train him like a dojo boy from like we're just going to beat the shit out of him, make him tough. And I was like, yeah, there he is. You can have him now. Shit, I don't care. Fucking boy's a handful. But man, it's just not going to be the same. The world's a different place without him.
Yeah.
Man. But those stories were pretty spot on, except for one. He talked about possibly something being done with a page out of the Bible. Now,
he did.
Now,
and then
I'm going to go
before you went on with this. We had opened this up to questions from fans, and Prophet of Ash on Twitter, because of that story that Mark Wolf told, he wants to know what other uses there are for the Bible. So while you tell this story, we could fill this in.
I'm going to go ahead and let you know that I don't remember doing that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying I don't remember being the one that did that. I'm not exactly sure who did that, but there's a real good possibility it did happen. Like a 97% chance. I just don't think that was me that did that. I would never do something like that.
Not a great Christian like you.
I probably did take the medicine after it was done, but I don't remember being the one that did that. But it was also many years ago, and it was Tell City, Indiana. What happens in Tell City stays in Tell City. It's what I was always told.
It does well, and
by Mark.
but you do not dispute the fact that you spooned the hell out of him that night.
Oh no, I claimed that. That's mine.
Okay.
I distinctly told him, I said, look, I'm a snuggler. And he goes, well, you just go ahead and snuggle if you have to. Well, next thing I know, I woke up and he was I said, does this remind you of jail? And he said, how did you know I've been to jail? And it was just funny. And then I said, don't worry. I've got my hand between these nice warm pillows. Those aren't pillows. Little planes, trains, and automobiles for everybody.
Exactly. Fantastic.
Hi, everybody. Most of you who are watching this know me as American Kickboxer, and I wanted to get on here real quick and leave a few thoughts about Mark Wolf. Now, on a personal level, I knew Mark on the level as most of you do your co-workers. I seen him every week at the shows, and he was more than competent worker, co-worker, and was a really, really... I'll explain a common bond here real quick. And the one thing that Mark had that all of us have, and that's a love for the business, and it's a love for wrestling. And that's one thing to his dying day that he carried with him. He was still helping train guys with Sam Houston, and he paid his dues, and he should be remembered much more than he is, because every week, no matter rain, shine, sleet, snow, hail, whatever, pay, whatever heartbreak, he showed up and he did his best. And I think some of the work that he put out, and it was his love with the old school wrestling, the angles that he had with the Todd Morton, number one, that really, really stands out to me, as well as his angle with Mitch Ryder. It was old school, and it was the style of wrestling that Mark loved, and he loved doing. And again, what brings me here is the connection we had for the love of the business. and he gave his heart, his soul, his mind, his body to the wrestling business. And I think that's one thing that should never, ever, ever be forgotten. And even in his passing, this is somebody that gave everything he had, physically, mentally, to entertain you guys every time that he stepped into the ring. So, my condolences to Mark's family. Mark, thank you for everything you've done for the business, for the fans. Understand it's not going to ever be forgotten by me and the other members, the alum of IWA Mid-South. Rest in peace, Mark Wolf.
I started going to wrestling around 2003. I was never big into wrestling growing up, but got hooked instantly when I started going. I became a fan of Mark's pretty fast. I even had a slight crush, but that also faded fast. Mainly because he was such a good guy and I wanted to be friends with him. Mark was one of the few guys that gave me advice to not date wrestlers. I remained friends with him until the day he passed. He has been to dinner with my sisters and I to get Wick pizza. I actually talked to him about a week before he passed to make plans for him to come up to Louisville and we all go out. He always wanted to help when I was trying to lose weight. I stopped going to wrestling when Chris Candido died, but returned several years later. I stayed friends with him over this time. I was in a very mentally and physically abusive relationship, and Mark was one of the few people I opened up to about it. He told me that he would beat his ass if I wanted him to. He also convinced me to finally leave. No one knew that. He told me that the guy was weakened to leave. He said if he was going to hurt you, he would have done it. He was just holding it over my head. He said, leave, and I bet he won't do anything, and if he does, I'll come to Kentucky and take care of it. My heart dropped when I saw he pass. I honestly thought I read it wrong. I truly miss my friend and his stories about his beautiful dog. We love you, Marky. Carmen.
And as Bull mentioned in those stories, the number of times that Mark would work injured, work hurt, go out there and risk further injury. He did a lot for IWA. There was so many times where Mark wouldn't take a payday and he would tell Ian, put that towards advertising. Let's get, advertise these shows, get some people out here to watch this stuff. We've got great guys on these shows. Please just take my payday and put it towards advertising, run some commercials. Of course, it never happened. Sadly, for reasons I've talked about plenty of times on previous episodes, with us not being able to run commercials, but Ian didn't let everybody else know that. And I mean, newspapers were even dead then. You couldn't, not as dead as they are now, but running an ad in the newspaper wouldn't have, nobody was buying the Louisville paper. It wouldn't have brought anybody out. So, Ian's theory was Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So he thought all he had to do was put on a wrestling show and people would find it and come out for it. Mark tried to get him to do a little bit of advertising and it just never happened. And, everybody always talks about how Chris Hero was the franchise of IWA Mid-South. And while Hero was great, and he was the Magnum TA of the company during that time, when I had Mark on the podcast on episode 8, and we talked about his place in the company and trying to figure out, was he the Ronnie Garvin? Was he, he always called himself the Sam Houston, but Mark did get to wear the IWA heavyweight title. So on that podcast, we decided it wasn't Sam Houston. It was, Ronnie Garvin was his role on the show. But more importantly than all that, he was the glue. He was the glue that held it all together, because he was the one that could go out there and get Bull Payne and Mitch Ryder and Todd Morton and get them over as super heels, and he would let them just kick the shit out of him on a weekly basis. When we were doing the Wednesday, Saturdays, twice a week, they would just beat the dog shit out of him so that they could be built up as killer heels to then be toppled by Hero and Ian. And in the course of doing those things, he received so many concussions that it really did a physical toll on his body and made life super difficult for him going forward. And he gave everything to IWA, and he was the glue. He kept it all together and made it all make sense. And when he decided to go back to North Carolina to take care of his mom, to take care of his grandma, to let his body recover, IWA wasn't the same after that. We lost, Mitch Page stopped wrestling right around that same time. So the camaraderie in the locker room wasn't as strong. Those were the two that kept everything lighthearted, kept everybody in a good mood. So Mark was deeply missed when he went back to North Carolina. And, again, like Bull said, nobody's ever said anything bad about Mark because there wasn't anything bad that you could say.
I knew Mark 23 years ago online. We went from friends to a brother-type bond despite the UK-US difference. He always knew, despite 21 concussions from pro wrestling, when to check in on my mental health. He always knew somehow when I needed him and vice versa. When Chris Hurrell went to his last Thanksgiving, I was the first person Mark told. Mark loved Chris so much. I want to thank Chris from the bottom of my heart for all he did for Mark. Also, Eddie Kingston, Jimmy Jacobs, and Claudio deserve a mention as well. My daughter Victoria was given a list of people to pick from to ask as adopted uncles, aunties, and godparents. She immediately chose Uncle Wolfie, and he was always there for her conversation and advice just from long distance. We cried, and we haven't really stopped when Mark passed. We had the same Pearl Jam song, we had Rage Against the Machine, Nirvana, soccer, old school wrestling, health advice, and just everything really. I hate that I tried for 2 decades to get him to the UK to wrestle, and then the Daily Star in the UK did an article when he passed. It's too ironic. If I am a better person, if I am a better human being, if I am a better man, if I behave better and help people better, then I thank Mark and his beautiful heart and soul. That's his legacy to me. I pray nightly that Mark is always spoken to by me, along with my late mother. I can't ever say goodbye. I'll try and I'll see you down the road, brother. Find my mom in heaven. She will keep you in with cups of teas, book reading, and cats. I love you. Thank you. Pete. Hello. My name is Victoria Stanford, daughter of Pete. I am a second-generation person in the wrestling business, whom was the goddaughter of Mark Wolf, and I always called him Uncle Wolfie. For all 23 years of my life, I have known Mark as a friend, an uncle, and a person who I love and trusted with my life. You see, I was born with a rare disease called Hirschsprung's disease. I also had a hole in my heart when I was born. Mark once was one of very few people who knew what was going on with my health when I was born. He supported my father mentally throughout the whole time of my 3 operations. It was not until about my 5th birthday that I fully understood my friendship and love that I had for Mark Wolf. Mark always asked my father how I was, even when life was at its toughest moments. He was always such an honest, wonderful, and true person. He loved me as a niece and one of his own. Our relationship was always strong, but it grew stronger by the day when I got into a relationship with my current partner. He loved the fact that another person was in my life that loved me for who I am. Our last interaction was over Facebook. I had asked him the most important question of my life. I had asked him to be my godfather, and he said yes. It was the most beautiful and precious gift he could have ever given me. I had a second person who loved me as much as my father loved me. I cried for over an hour just because I was overwhelmed with love, affection, and joy. When I got told by my father Uncle Wolf had passed, I cried so hard that my second father type was in heaven. A few days later, I was still crying, and every night I wished him sweet dreams. As a tribute to Uncle Wolf, I collected a teddy bear, stuffy, and a blanket that is shaped and designed like a wolf. My friend in America has a wolf rescue place and even named a wolf after myself and Mark. For our friendship and family bond, I plan on having a tattooed tribute to Uncle Wolf. For now, though, I just want to say we missed you so much, Uncle Wolfie. And I'll never forget you and your beautiful bond we have and had. I will forever keep your memory on. Now do me a favor, please find my beautiful cats Kenny and Lockyer in heaven, give them the biggest cuddle. And please find my beautiful grandmother Christine. I promise she will keep you safe until I return to give you the cuddle you always deserve. Thank you for everything, Wolfie.
Hey, wrestling fans, the other message that I had sent to me to read came from John Howard, former referee in IWA Mid-South, also a participant in the exploding barbed wire match, as talked about by Brent Blades on episode 2 of the podcast. So this is just a short message from John Howard, where he says, I don't have one particular memory with Mark, just a bunch of good times. From visiting him and Hero at their apartment, Wrestle House, Indiana, getting advice to make sure I would be better the next match. I wish I knew the true story about the nickname he gave me. At some point, could you make a brief statement about him being nicer, friendlier, and more helpful than he had to be? Thank you. And again, that was from John Howard, IWA ref, talking about the help that Mark Wolf gave him. And Mark was that way with everybody. If anybody had a question, if anybody wanted advice, Mark was always there to help, willing to give his time, give advice, willing to take anybody under his wing, help them train, help them get better, because he wanted them to be better. He wanted the show to be better. He wanted everybody to be able to make a living doing this, because we all loved it and we all wanted to make IWA successful, and Mark did everything he could to help with that. And he was a great friend to me. And I wish that I had kept in better contact with him after I had left IWA. I've talked about it in the past on these episodes about how I always tried to keep a distance, not become friends since I was office, since I was in a position where I had to speak up and make decisions and suggestions as to who shouldn't be on the show, who should be on the show. And I didn't want friendship to cloud those judgments. So I would keep a distance. I was very introverted. So that played a huge role into it as well, where it was just easier for me to be antisocial, for me to separate myself and not have to be extroverted. But Mark was one of the few that broke through that shell. Mark was one of the few that was just such a great person and so fun to be around that I broke my rule and I became friends with him. But then, you just fall out of contact with people when you're not seeing them twice a week, when you're not around them all the time. You forget to reach out with a message and just say, hey, how you doing? Checking in on you. And since Mark's untimely passing, I've tried to be better with that. I find myself picking up my phone and just scrolling and being like, well, who haven't I reached out to recently? And we're all getting older. We're all getting older, and several of us aren't in the best of health. And so I find myself checking in on them. I find myself almost annoying them, being like, I'm good. I'm good. You don't have to ask me. And I'm like, no, I want to make sure that you're still doing good. So if we can take anything from what happened with Mark, it's just don't take your friends for granted. Don't just assume that you're always going to have tomorrow to reach out and say hi, to reach out and say, I love you. So make sure you're doing that while you've got the opportunity. Don't wait until it's too late. So I'm sorry I fell out of contact with you for so long, but I'm glad we reconnected before it was too late. Love you, Marky.
Mark and I text daily. Rarely in probably 10-15 years would we miss more than a day. We met at the gym in Salisbury back when I was still reffing pro hockey in the American and East Coast leagues. He spotted my hockey logo on my tee at the gym, came over and introduced himself. After a few talks in the gym, it seemed like I knew this guy forever. We chatted over hockey and his stories of hanging out in Charlotte with some pro players, his commitment to his mom while she was in her battle with cancer, old music, stories of his grandpa who I could tell he thought the world of, and everything else you can think of. Mark and I went to many Intimidators baseball games as well as Carolina Hurricane games, who had to, of course, beat my beloved Blackhawks that night we went. A Jason Aldean concert, Speedway Christmas, among other things. Mark loved every moment of those and lived in those moments. No phone, no nonsense, enjoying the time. When Mark decided to build a fire pit in his backyard, all bets were off. He loved it out there with Talia. 10 a.m., 5 p.m., 3 a.m., it didn't matter. If the wood was dry, there'd be a fire and a bourbon. On Saturdays, I'd work out of town and I'd have to drive near his house. If he was outside, he'd text me the flashing "bar is open" sign. That was my invitation. Throughout the better times, and even when we were both battling issues in our own lives, we'd chirp each other over Blue Jays versus Orioles, Blackhawks versus Hurricanes, and always Canada versus U.S. We'd even share workout motivation with each other to keep moving forward. Therapy, humor, and a hot mess all rolled into one. I miss those daily texts, those outings, and especially those backyard talks. Mark was one of the nicest people I'd ever met. Although he had a skill set that could cripple some of the toughest and loudest, he was truly a gentle giant. I lost a piece of myself in December 2025, but I am grateful for all the pieces Mark Wolf added to my life. The photo of the bourbon on the fire pit was taken 3 days after we lost him. It was eating me up having to work after hearing the news, and I wanted to share one last drink with Mark. His neighbor Quan eventually came over, so we toasted Mark and poured him a drink for every one that we had. Mark would always tell me, "One more," before I left, so we left him a full cup. Cheers, my friend. Jason.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Hero, and I would like to talk about my friend Mark Wolf. Man, where do you start? Well, I started wrestling for IWA Mid-South in the summer of 2000. I was just 20 years old, and that's where I met Marky. If any of you know Mark pretty well, and when you first are around him, he's a pretty quiet guy. Then, as you get to know him, you find out that he's the guy that sits back and watches and starts shit from afar, right? So sooner or later, Mark and I started to talk wrestling, and we really connected. We liked a lot of the same things. He was a bit older, so Mark just he was like a big brother, man. He taught me a lot about life. He taught me about wrestling. He taught me about music. So we hit it off. I remember Mark actually letting me borrow the Dynamite Kid autobiography, and before I knew it, when I'd come down to the Kentuckiana area, I'd end up crashing at Mark Wolf's place. I'd be on his couch, sleeping on the floor, whatever, just sitting, and we'd watch wrestling tapes. I'd show him stuff that I brought. He'd show me stuff that he had. And, that was kind of how our friendship began. And at that time, Mark was just refereeing matches. He wasn't wrestling yet for IWA Mid-South. I didn't realize he had done a little bit in wrestling, much earlier. I didn't realize that until much later. But Mark was the official Mark. He was the referee for IWA Mid-South, and through an angle or two, he made his way into the ring to start having matches, but not before refereeing a couple matches that I had with Bull Payne that scared the shit out of me. A couple funny stories for a later date, but Mark and I, we just had a bond, and we would end up having matches with each other as opponents, as partners. And like I said, he taught me a lot. When it came time to get my own apartment, Mark was my roommate. He was my first roommate. Mark, myself, Travis, Desmond, we all moved into an apartment in Clarksville, Indiana, January 2002, and that apartment became Wrestle House, Indiana. And one thing that Mark really impressed upon was just hospitality and generosity. So I could not keep track of how many different people crashed at the place, whether it was for a night, a weekend, for weeks, for months. We had a revolving door at Wrestle House, Indiana, and we watched a lot of wrestling. That was also when Mark and I had our best matches together. Mark, I know I'm talking about him as a guy, but he was a really talented pro wrestler. He really was. He was, even though he could be a heel in real life, he was just a natural baby face. He was great at getting his ass kicked, great at selling, great at getting the people behind him. He just really poured his heart and soul into it. And then he eventually found his wrestling soulmate, Mitch Ryder. And people still talk about those matches. There's just something about them that clicked. And I was fortunate to be around for a lot of those. And we would have a lot of stories and jokes and inside jokes between me, him, and Mitch. Again, save for a later date. But that just, if you want to see Mark Wolf at his best, watch him and Mitch Ryder. So I had already mentioned that Mark was generous. He was just a great friend. He was always supportive. He was always encouraging. He would always bust my balls, but never in a way that would genuinely hurt me or upset me. That was just kind of his way. Humor was Marky's thing. Just, if you ever heard the guy laugh, he just had an infectious laugh, and it just inspired so much more laughter. And just when things get tough, he would just be a guy that would kind of keep things light. And yeah, it's just really good to have someone like that you can depend on to have a good laugh. And as far as being a friend, I knew that Mark loved me. And the way that I knew that Mark loved me was that he would tell me. Much love, right? If you know Marky, you know the phrase, much love. And he just, he was a very loyal, loving, devoted friend. He was the kind of friend that could be the peacemaker. If you and someone had a bit of a falling out or were pissed at each other, he would be the one to kind of broker, get you guys in a room together and talk to one guy, talk to the other guy, and next thing you know it, you're all buddies again. I miss his friendship greatly. Man, I miss everything. I miss going to the gym with him. I miss being in the ring with him. I miss sitting on the couch and watching tapes. I miss late night text messages, ridiculous Instagram DMs, these Facebook videos he would share. Like, I just miss it all, man. I had the privilege to spend last Thanksgiving with Mark, just a few weeks before he passed. And, we had tears in our eyes. We told each other that we loved each other, and it had been so long. It had been too long. And, gosh, neither of us had any clue that it'd be the last time. And Mark had a rough couple of years, like a really difficult couple of years. And, between the head injuries he suffered through wrestling, or the wear and tear on his body, or just the struggles with depression, or just mental issues that he had battled with since I first met him. Mark had some difficult parts of his life that were hard for him to reconcile, and he would kind of close himself off from time to time. And he knew how important it was to reach out to people, to check in on them, tell them that you love them, you miss them. Because I know he did that for so many people. So I did my best to do that for him. You can't help but wish you would have done more, wish you would have made more time. It's agonizing, right? It's tough. I'm sure all of us on this podcast here, we have regrets, but just know that Mark loved us and we loved him, and none of us were shy about letting him know. Like I said, I miss everything. I miss him sending me a text at 3 a.m. with a YouTube video, and I click on it and the video's got 2 views, me and him. Right? I've heard similar stories from Ben like that. And how about his relationship with his dogs? First there was Tito, and then Tala came into his life, and man, she really saved him. She really kept him around, and just having to be responsible for her, and her being so affectionate to him. It just, how many fucking selfies did he take with that dog? Right? I can't picture his face without her face too. So it makes me happy to know that she's with his brother and is living a good life. That's all he wanted. He wanted a good life for her, because she was good to him. It's been heartbreaking this whole situation. Really hard to process initially, and then you think the sadness is going to let up at some point, and it doesn't. You get busy, you do a bunch of stuff, and it just comes right back to you. I said Mark had taught me a lot about music. Well, there's several songs and just types of music that make me think of him. And Mark would always message me. He'd say the radio's talking to me. And that was his way of saying he was either in a bad place and he heard a song that kind of snapped him out of it, or he remembered a song that took him back to some silly situation we were in at some point. And now the radio talks to me, because when I hear those songs, of course it makes me think about him. And God, he really liked some sad music, didn't he? You know, he loved Nirvana. He loved Chris Cornell, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots. You know, what is it with him connecting with all of these artists that have passed away, you know? It's, man, it really is something. But I'm glad that I knew Mark. I'm glad that he was my friend. You know, I'm sad that he's gone. I'm crushed that he's gone. But I'm so glad that I have so many stories, so many memories. Man, there's just a million things you can think about, right? I just wish I could send him a message. I mean, how many times in the last 3 months did I stop short from sharing a video with him or sending him a picture, or something happens and you go, man, I just, you know, I wish I could show that to him. I wish he could see it. I just listened to the podcast, Jim, that you did with Mark. I couldn't bring myself to listen to it earlier, but it was equal parts happy and sad, because, I mean, that was him, you know, just talking shit for 2.5 hours, saying everything and saying nothing at the same time. His laugh, I mean, you can just play it over and over. It just makes me sad that we didn't do more stuff like that, because he was such a funny guy. He knew so much. He was always so helpful when it came to people in wrestling. Whenever he came across somebody that was young and hungry, he would take time for them and encourage them, you know, whether it was actually physically getting in the ring or getting on the mat with them or watching their stuff and sending them messages about it. Like I said, he was just so generous and he loved to be so helpful. Gosh, it really is a tragedy that he's gone. You know, it's, you know, selfishly because my friend's gone, but also just for the world. What a tremendous loss. Such a compassionate, caring individual. Such a smart, funny guy. It's just, you know, I'm sad for me, but I'm sad for everybody else. I'm sad for those that also loved him. I'm sad for those that never got to know him at all. It's an immense loss. It's just so crushing. And Mark deserves to have his life celebrated. He deserves to have these stories told about him and for people to realize how many people he touched and how much he meant to so many people. We're all still so heartbroken because he was just a beautiful friend. He was, with a beautiful heart. He really had this sense of humanity about him, just a compassion for others. I'm sure somebody in here has talked about or has at least heard stories of him hanging out with homeless guys and trying to teach them arm bars. And then, you know, grabbing them a fucking hot dog from the gas station, you know, like, and in some situations, you know, maybe that guy's hungry, but also maybe that guy just needs some community. Maybe that guy just needs, a friend for a couple hours, or, maybe he just needs someone's backyard to crash in for the night. That was Mark. He was inspiring, he was encouraging. If you had something that you were good at, he would tell you, right? He might also tell you how you could have done it better, but he also let you know that you were good, that you were gifted, that you were caring, and that it was a good thing that you were sharing your gift with others. Man, I just feel really proud to have known that man. I hope everyone, in doing this podcast and sending in their thoughts, I hope it's a little cathartic, because the pain doesn't go away, right? That's the saying, the pain doesn't go away. We just grow a greater capacity to deal with it. We've all lost people. We've lost a lot of people now. And I am by no means religious in any way. But as corny or as cheesy as it may be, I just like the idea of Mark getting to kick back and spend some time with people that we lost and that he really missed, whether it's him and Mitch Ryder, or he's sitting there with Tracy Smothers, maybe he's trying to make a Thanksgiving plate for Sabu or Axel Rotten. That's a good story there. Our friend Shannon, otherwise known as Daphne. Maybe he's kicking it with Victor Philpott and Mac Daddy Mike. Maybe he's down in the basement watching wrestling with his grandpa. Maybe he's sitting with his mom and Tito. Man. Marky, we love you. We miss you. We're never going to forget you. We're going to tell everybody about you. And in most situations, not all, in most situations, we're going to think, what would Mark do? How would Mark do this? Would he be compassionate? Would he be caring? Would he be supportive? Would he make an off-color joke at the wrong time? Man. I appreciate you, Jim, Nick, for putting this together. I appreciate everybody for sending something in. We love you, Marky. We miss you. Much love. Much love, my friend.
All right, so what we do again? We're here.
And we twist it and we shake.
Right there?
Yeah.